All right, Pat, great to see you again. Thanks for coming on.
Well, my pleasure.
And Lauren is here to ask you the first question, of course. And I
Oh,
think she already
thank you,
did this
Lauren. Go ahead.
maybe on some of the other interviews we've done together in the past, but never mind. Go ahead. What's the question?
Who is John Holt?
Who was John Holt? John Holt was a fifth grade school teacher in private schools who started to question what he was doing in front of the classroom after many years of teaching, because he said, I teach, but they don't learn. So what's going on? So he wrote a book called How Children Fail, where he tried to explain that it was the structure of schooling, the way he had to run his classes that prevented a genuine exchange of information between teacher and student. And then just, as John said, the students are empty bottles and the teacher's pouring knowledge into them. And, he wanted to change that. He preferred the metaphor of the gardener. He says, you can't force flowers to grow fast. You just nurture them and work with them. And a lot of people didn't like those ideas. He worked at it for many years. His second book, How Children Learn, came out, and that just celebrated its 50th anniversary in print about 4 years ago, and just got translated into Italian. So his work is in How Children Fail. His first book is also still in print. So he hit a nerve, but he couldn't change his. People wouldn't change the schools. Schools wouldn't change. In fact, he saw that schools were getting more like school in the sense of being rigid, requiring tests instead of a proof of ability or a project or a demonstration. It always had to be a test score. And so after working and writing several books on this topic, trying to figure out how do I get children to really explore the world and be part of it so they can learn. We don't learn just by being instructed through a curriculum over 12 years. Because, John saw that when kids aren't in school, they learn from play, they learn from silence, they learn from asking questions of other people, other kids, And so, long story short, in 1977, he said, I'm giving up on trying to change the schools. I've said everything I can to try and change the schools. The only way they'll change is if people show them another way. So he supported homeschooling. He wrote a book called Instead of Education that called for an underground railroad to get kids out of school, because he was still in that school mentality. But people wrote to him after he wrote that book saying, John, you don't need an underground railroad. You could just teach your own children. And he was like, tell me more. And then the very next year, that book came out in 76. In 1977, he founded Growing Without Schooling magazine. I'm editing a collection of it right now. This is the 10th anniversary issue. I was 26 or 27 when I published this. John had been dead maybe a year or 2 years at that point. And so we continued his work. And, when John was alive, there were maybe 2,000 subscribers to the magazine. When we closed it in 2001, we had about 5,000. We never seemed to be able to get over that. But we clearly influenced a lot of people. Needless to say, a lot of people, felt like school at home was more the way to go than unschooling, which is what John termed homeschooling, because he didn't want to turn your so why we're leaving school and trying to show them ways to do things better, like he was not against school, but he was just like, let the children choose it, and that, long story short, so that's how we came to homeschooling and unschooling, and that's in a synopsis, that's who John Holt was.
Amazing. And we will dig into more of that as well, Pat, and for reasons that I'll explain to you. But is that a good enough answer for you? Did you have any follow-up questions?
Yeah, you can ask me anything.
What was it like working with John Holt?
It was a very different experience than anything I could have expected. Because I went to college, I got a graduate degree. I thought I was going to be working in some sort of school or a business. And and because my major was English, I figured I could be a writer or do marketing or something like that. So when I came to work for John, I went in there just to learn the skill of word processing. Nowadays, you don't even know what that is. As everyone has it built into their phones. I mean, that's basically what Microsoft Word is or Apple Pages. But back then in 1981, they had separate machines called word processors. And they used little teeny floppy disks that could hold maybe 12 pages tops of information. And John was in love with that machine. He had an Olivetti, and he thought it was the greatest thing. And everyone, when I was looking for work, because I graduated and I thought I'd be, like I said, working in an office or something. They weren't hiring teachers or anything they were firing teachers. They were having all these budget cutbacks. So I wound up running a cash register in a bookstore. But that bookstore was near the Holt office, and John was an avid reader. And one of the cashier's husbands was a volunteer at the Holt office. And so I said, I really want to get out of, retail sales and, and do something. So I guess I got to learn word processing. So one of the cashier, her name was Cindy, said, oh, my husband will, he volunteers up at Holt. So he'll teach you how to use a word processor in return for using it to answer correspondence and fill orders and all that other stuff. And so that's how I got started there. And John was actually speaking in Scandinavia. He had a 3-month speaking tour. He had just published Teach Your Own, and it was very controversial when it first came out. And so I had this image of the office as a very busy spot, but I was always there in the evening because I was working in the bookstore during the day. And one night, like I'd been there now maybe 2 or 3 months, there was John Holt. He was actually just sitting in the stacks of of the inventory of all the books, just pulling a book off the shelf and reading it. And I was like, oh, who are you? He's like, I'm John Holt. And we started talking, and I explained to him, he was given a heads up that there would be someone in the office that night, but we'd never met. And so one thing led to another, and what I realized is that John had different ideas about, he was reading books like In Search of Excellence and Theory Z, all these books about Japanese management and stuff that it involves bringing the employees closer to management and making decisions jointly and stuff, and trying to run these companies like that. And that's how he was running Holt Associates. He just felt that it was important that people own their work. He always said that teachers should be the bosses of their own classrooms, and that's one of the problems of school is they don't let them do that. So I was kind of surprised, and pleased to find that if you took some initiative and it failed, you didn't get slapped on the hand or fired. John just, well, what went wrong? What were you trying to do? Okay, and so I learned a lot of different things, and so I went from packing books and volunteering. They were growing. He'd been on a couple of TV shows, and you could see these online on YouTube. The Phil Donahue show was huge. They used to drop mail sacks full of reader mail to us. It was amazing back then, And so I became ad manager. They needed some more income, and so I that position was just created, and I filled that role, and then one thing led to another. His manager left and, suggested I replace her, and I did. And then I worked very closely with John, so it was a great experience working for him. And this is important. He wanted the office to be welcoming to children. So we always had volunteer families, homeschooling families that would come in with their children, but we also had employees who brought in their own children. And that's, and that was something that I continued and brought my own kids into work. I have photos. In fact, they might be in this issue. I don't know. Maybe it's in issue 57 oh, here it is. So this is the 10th anniversary. This is the staff. This is me at my desk with my 9-month-old daughter, who I brought in because my wife was working as a TR Productions, a media company at the time.
And what's her name?
And
what was her name, Pat?
There's Donna with her child. She was one of the editors. And I don't know if you can see all this. there's Lauren at the office climbing up. I don't know if you could see this, trying to climb up and grab a book off a shelf. This was two of them, Sue Mahika and her daughter, Celia, I think was her name. Yeah, Celia Mahika and Lauren just there exploring the bookshelves. So it was really cool, and I'll never forget, we had a UPS driver. This is many years later too, as we moved our offices as we grew. This UPS driver came in one day, and he was putting the boxes down. He saw all these kids playing on the floor and a mom on the phone and another person, packing books. And he says, "What is this place? I thought it was a school or a kindergarten, but it's an office." So yeah, so it was a cool place to be. I think. Some people don't like working around kids. I have no problem with that.
Oh, it's a nightmare.
Right?
Right. Yeah. As she's sitting here asking the first question on the podcast. But yeah, her name's Lauren too, and she's been helping out on the podcast for the last 3 years. So yeah, bring your kids to work day every day.
Right.
Because we're in the same house every day.
Oh, Karina, our facilitator, she had to bring her 7-month-old or no older. She had to bring him in because he just woke up just when she was about to go in class with us.
Right.
So yeah, but it was really cute because we got to see him. So.
Right. Well, thank you. I know you've got to run for a
Yes,
club. So yeah.
Bye. Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Nice to meet you, Lauren.
Nice to meet you
talking
too.
to you.
Sorry? Oh, yes.
Nice
Sorry. Nice talking to you.
Right. Thanks, Pat.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah, there's lots to pull on here. So just to get you up to speed, the last time we spoke was for the Homeschooling Global Summit, which we did various I think 2019 and 2020, and you were very kind enough to give up your time and come on. And from those summits spawned Galileo, which now become Crubio, which is what Lauren is still on. So that's what she's referencing. That's what she's off now to go and do a filmmaking club. So it's a kind of a self-directed education, unschooling approach to give the students the ability to choose the kind of clubs that they're interested in, and then connect with an expert or somebody that can run the club. So that's what's been going on since we last spoke. Still very much into the unschooling, self-directed education realm. And I also run this podcast, which is a Bitcoin podcast. But one thing that has been really evident in the space and with the people that I meet when I travel around the world going to conferences is people come across to me and are very interested in this idea of separating education from state. And the reason being, because if you've already discovered Bitcoin, you've already decided that, hang on, perhaps the state controlling the currency in which I exchange my time and energy to accrue that currency is being controlled by a monopolistic cartel that can raise and lower interest rates at a whim, or freeze my bank accounts, or print money into the system whenever they want. That's not something I want to be a part of anymore. So a lot of people who have come into the space, they've separated money from state, and it's just a natural progression to, what else can I separate and take more control of my life? And I've had numerous people on the show talking about their own experiences with their own families. I've also had Peter Gray and Naomi Fisher on the show. So it's nice to keep this going with having yourself on and talking about John, because a lot of people have just learned about John through listening to the show and listening to these ideas. They're like, okay, well, where should I go? What are the resources? So John Holt, obviously, name comes up a lot. And I just wanted to get you on to go through exactly, because in my mind, and probably in many others, he's probably kind of the pioneer, I would say, especially in the US, if not globally, the pioneer of this movement of, wait, perhaps this system isn't right. Perhaps this isn't, serving our kids. So what what led John to that point before he was a school teacher? Because I think that is a very interesting topic as well. What he'd done before becoming a school teacher, and then you can take us on that arc of his life and how all of a sudden, bam, he's on the scene with his books, dropping truth bombs. The Donahue Show, which I urge anybody to go and watch on YouTube. It's so frustrating that we're still having the same arguments today. But
isn't it?
oh, so yeah, let's go for it. Let's try and unpack a little bit about yeah, what was he doing beforehand before he became a
Well,
school teacher?
sure. Before he graduated from an Ivy League college and immediately went in the Navy. He was World War II in 1943, and he became a lieutenant on a submarine. Saw active duty in the South Pacific. After that, I mean, his experience being in the military, he fully grasped the dangers of nuclear power and, of being a nuclear power. And he didn't feel that, and he wasn't alone. I mean, there was this group called the World Federalists that wanted to create a world government to control nuclear weapons. And he joined that, and he became a spokesperson for it. I think he was like the head of the New York State chapter. He would go around. But then he realized after, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years of work there, that the organization was funded and thriving, but they weren't making any progress on nuclear deproliferation. If anything, it was getting worse. And he felt that, the overall structure was just becoming self-serving rather than actually focused on its actual issue that it wants to do, which is prevent nuclear war. And so John was very disillusioned with the way that went, and he quit it, and I forget exactly the sequence, but what happened was he decided to take a year off, more or less. Did something that now we call gap year, but he was in his late 20s or mid 20s at this point, and already served in a war. So I don't know if you could call it a gap year, but he rode a bike around Europe, and trying to figure out what he wanted to do. And his some of his journal entries from that time show him fishing around for things, but he was always thinking about what work do I want? How do I do this? And so when he went back to the States, he had 2 sisters, and both of them, one lived in Connecticut, the other in New Mexico, and he was closest with the one in New Mexico, Jane, and she had 3 kids, I believe, young children, very young children, under 5, and John was living with them. And she noticed how well he got along with the kids, and so she said, "Well, why don't you try being a school teacher?" And he was like, "Well, I don't know, I don't have the degree, blah blah blah." So she said, "Well, look, there's a school. It's still there, the Colorado Rocky Mountain School." And she said, "Why don't you go there?" So John thought about it, and he went. And they said, "Well, look, we're not looking for any teachers right now, but we need a soccer coach and a cook." And that's what John took those positions, because and he writes about this in his book Never Too Late, about like, why do we delay going? Like, if you want to find work worth doing, why do we say you need 4 years of college before you can go and see if you want to do it? He says, go directly to it and see what happens, and then if you need further education or whatever prerequisites they require for the job, then you decide at that point, do I want to do it? You don't like invest 4 years of study only to find, and when we know this from a lot of lawyers really, because now there's a lot of lawyers in America, and a lot of them, feel trapped because they have all these loans and things that, and they have well-paying jobs, but they don't like their job anymore. But, so they're trapped, and John, was wise enough to see that happening, but he lived what he preached, So he worked there as a cook and a soccer coach, and then he became a 5th grade teacher. And there's a photo on our website, which, by the way, I'm just before I joined this, I got a note from the web designer I'm working with that the new update is up there. So I hope to debut a whole new website in the coming weeks. And it's got some neat things from the archives in there that haven't been up there before. But so John did that, and then you know, he always loved music. He was in those years he was playing the flute, and he loved classical music. And he decided, well, you know, now that I found work that I enjoy doing, I don't really care for Colorado that much because it doesn't have as much music as he wanted. So I moved to Boston, and he wound up teaching at some of the finest private schools in Boston, the Commonwealth School, the Fairweather. So these are all here, you know, they're all the you know, the Ivy League prep schools, you know, for in the Boston area. And it was here in Boston where John had that revelation: I teach, but they don't learn. And so, you know, but rather than, you know, again, like I just love the example that he sets. Rather than just trying to figure out himself, he worked with his friend Bill Hull, who was also a teacher there, and the school was willing to let them do this, where they co-taught. So Bill would be in front of the class, John would be taking notes in the back of the class. Then they'd switch, and then at the end of the day or the week, they'd compare their notes. And in fact, if you read How Children Fail, you will be reading those notes. You see them, you know, going back and forth. And so it's a model of how we learn. You know, I mean, John didn't arrive at his ideas out of some ideological position. He arrived at them from a practical position of, well, how do I help these children learn? And then he realized that, you know, so much of learning was you know, stymied by all the prerequisites and concepts about how children learn, such as they only learn by being instructed, and then we test them. And John showed at his prep school. You know, he and Bill would give a test on Friday. 99% of the kids would pass. They give the same test on Monday. 98% would fail. And he would be like, "What's going on here?" And How Children Learn, 1964. He said, "School is just a charade of learning at the highest levels." I mean, that's the thing people keep forgetting. He's criticizing the Ivy League prep schools, not, you know, not just, you know, the public schools that everyone likes to dump on, you know. So you know, with that insight, you know, he got fired from his work after that, because he started to do things like, well, what are you interested in? So kids would say music, so he would bring a trumpet in, or a typewriter. You know, he would bring real objects in to let children use. And then other teachers started to complain his classes were noisy. Other students want to be in John's classes because, you know, they were more interesting. And so there was all this pressure. And so, you know, he wound up getting fired from a lot of his jobs. But then How Children Fail became a bestseller. You know, and it's so, you know, it's so interesting to me, you know, because another person that we're both familiar with had a similar trajectory, John Gatto. He was teaching in the New York City public schools, and he was getting kids out on the street. Like if they wanted to sell sweaters, the homemade sweaters, he figured out ways to get them out of the classrooms when they could do that. One kid wanted to be a cartoonist. He figured out how to get him he had a connection with Marvel, I think it was, and he got him able to intern there, you know, and then he was going to get fired for that, you know, because he wasn't teaching the curriculum, but he was getting results. So he submitted his work to New York State's Teachers of the Year awards, and he won it. And his book, Dumbing Us Down, is all about, like, pretty much how he took kids outside the classroom, and by exposing them to the real world, they rose to the occasion and did these things. But he literally had to write that book to keep his teaching position. And then, you know, he decided, you know, he wasn't going to be a teacher anymore. But, you know, he, you know, so, you know, John was among the first, but he's hardly the first to have these insights. I mean, you know, John, I mean, if you go back to like Bronson Alcott, you know, the father of Louisa May Alcott and Little Woman, I mean, they were all homeschooled, and there are so many in Britain, you know, I mean, we have Summerhill, but I forget the gentleman's name, but before Summerhill, there was yet someone else who influenced A.S. Neal, you know. So there's always been this trend of working with individuals, working with people in their interest, instead of what some authority on high says. Oh, you must all learn Spanish. Why? It's like, if I want to learn Spanish, I mean, there's a reason, but it turns out the reason in America, at least, is because colleges require a foreign language. Why? Because it shows you're a well-rounded individual. Why? So we're stuck with this legacy of assumptions that are really based on like the 19th century concept of stand and deliver and sit down, shut up, and do as I say. And and now I'm worried, as we see AI and all these things coming up. I mean, places like what you're describing, like Kubrio and other places that use technology as a way to get kids into the world. It's not like trying to lock them into a headset for 3 hours. There was this New York article about the brave new world of homeschooling just a couple of weeks ago. And it's about kids wearing virtual reality headsets for 3 hours a day. And I'm like, wait a minute, virtual reality, that's something to explore. That's something to be aware of. But I don't want to live in it, 3 hours a day. Give me a break.
Yeah, no, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And just to touch on John here again, I visited John Holt GWS, and I just had a quick look at a few of the pictures, and a part of his life here I didn't realize, I'd not read about this part, refusing an honorary degree from
Yes.
Wesleyan,
Yeah.
Wesleyan University. And the quote, and this is awesome. Author John Holt, critic of modern education, refused to accept an honorary degree as he spoke recently at Wesleyan University, saying that colleges are among the chief enslaving institutions in America. This was 1970s, dropping these kind of truth bombs.
That's right. That's right. Because he saw how, what was preventing a lot of classroom change at like the elementary, even the kindergarten level, was people's obsession about getting into college.
Mm.
And I think we sort of hit the apogee when we had this when President Obama had the College for All program, and he was trying to increase, and then the next thing you know, we have like these thousands of students, or maybe million students with debt that's killing them right now, and jobs that don't pay anywhere near what they need to repay this debt. So I mean, they're so how can you say they're not enslaving if they're literally putting people, just, we don't have debtor's prison, but it might as well be, right, with the stress that people have about dealing with this sort of stuff.
Did the two Johns did the two Johns ever meet? Did Holt and Gatto?
No. John Gatto came around in 1991, 92, I believe.
Right.
He died in 1985.
Right. Because it's interesting, because I've read Gatto's work, Dumbing Us Down, Weapons of Mass Instruction, and the Underground History. Now, it's the Underground History that's where it gets dark, right? That's where
and I mean, just briefly, I mean, that was one of the things, I mean, John Gatto was always far more conservative than I knew, because he presented as like, this liberal reformer, let's give kids all this freedom. But as time went on, and he got more and more involved in, like, I hate to say conspiracy theories, because but he came close. He gets adjacent to that in Underground History a lot. And I remember, like, he wanted me to publish it. He wanted Holt Associates to publish the book. And the first thing I said, well, we have to do it as a couple of volumes, because the manuscript, I'm not kidding, the manuscript he gave me was like this. I mean, thousands of pages. And without even looking at any of my commentary, no, nothing, not a word changes. It's just if it is, it's going to be me. And that got him, I mean, that's how he lost a major publisher for the book. He had a nice contract signed up for it to come out with a major American publisher, and he reneged on the deal because he didn't want to just do the edits, and so that's why he wound up self-publishing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible piece of work. And just from that caption, reading John Holt clearly saw that there was some kind of enslavement going on there, and Taylor Gatto and his work is like, listen, this has been arranged in such a way to keep you
Right.
dumbing us down, to keep that glass ceiling right above your head, to keep you enslaved. And then, as you said, you now have this situation where so many kids, whether they're millennials or whatever generation just underneath, crippling debt, where they were
Yeah.
almost marketed university or college on a grand
Mhm.
scale, just to get them in there and to take those debts. And when you look at the way that the debt system is set up as well, the finance system, like, an entrepreneur at the age of 18, you might get $10,000 business loan if you're really lucky and you find the right person
Mhm.
on the right day at the right bank and you've shopped around for months on
Mhm.
end. But you'll
Mhm.
get a 200 grand check to go to college. Like, things like this is so
Yeah.
obvious how it's been skewed
Right.
to
Right.
get people on this
Right.
kind of debt hamster wheel.
And I hope the cat's out of the bag, although I doubt it, because people just don't see options. I mean, and that's the thing to go back to homeschooling, that's the options. Like, you don't have to go. Learning is part of growth, and you don't have to go to school to grow. But John was not well, John Holt favored talked about vouchers is a possible way of changing, because he really felt that, as do I, that we need thousands more places for children to be and learn from, and people to mix with. It shouldn't just be this K through 12 setup that we have. And as Ivan Illich pointed out in his book Deschooling Society, which really influenced John in 1971,
Mhm.
if you go to communist China, or you go to America or Canada or Britain, the schools are run the same. The bells ring, the teachers teach, the students obey. And the content is different, but the structure is the same. And then I later learned by studying with Illich that actually this gentleman, this French philosopher Jacques Ellul, pointed this out in a book called The Technological Society that came out in the 50s. And he called schools this massive form of social control, that it's a technology to keep the masses busy. And so there's quite a tradition of analysts who look at this. But it's really interesting to me that the taking the step out, like you have, like I have, and just saying, well, let's explore. I mean, we still intersect with the education establishment for different. In fact, we can even make the Cubrio as like a school. But the big difference is people are choosing, and they're able to design. Like, if your daughter is interested in studying whales, she could do it right now. But first, you would have to take a course in marine biology. Right? No, now you go right to whales and then spread out to these other things. But we have this idea that all information is organized. And it always cracks me up when the OECD is like this taxonomy of everything that every child needs to learn. And it's just like, and when they should learn it. It's like, well, wait a minute. What if you don't learn to Spanish until you're in your 20s, and you decide, oh, I want to go to Mexico, and so pick up some Spanish there. I mean, this idea that schools turn us into Swiss Army knives. So once we graduate, we forget 99% of what we're as soon as the test is over, because it's really not self-motivated. There's no
No,
intrinsic motivation. The only reason we're doing it is because we have to.
absolutely. And the Ivan Illich book is a great one. There's another one out there for people listening to this that might not be aware. Murray Rothbard wrote a book called Education, Free and Compulsory, which
Mm,
is another really interesting look at, like, the education system and
mhm,
how it's been set up and why, and some of the things you should really be awake to. So what I'd
mhm,
be interested to know now is, John gets to this point, he starts dropping all the truth bombs. He must come in with a bit of flack. He goes on the Phil Donahue show, is that
yeah,
correct?
hold on,
Yeah.
yeah.
You start getting sacks of mail. um
Mhm.
you're in a battle right now, right? Because you've gone up against the establishment. people, the education system, most systems in general, but the education system certainly doesn't like being criticized. I mean, how dare you? How dare
Hmm.
you criticize this establishment? I mean, what
Hmm.
you don't like education, Mr. Farenga? Like you don't agree that free education is a human right? You know, all of this real perfectly crafted way of diminishing you comes at you. And I remember watching that Donahue show on YouTube, shaking my head, but John was so calm and collected. He must have battered them back so many times.
Oh yeah.
What other kind of problems were you facing then as you were trying to grow this awareness, trying to ring the alarm bell to people, trying to give them that hope that you have another choice? What were you getting lent on from mainstream media and negative
Oh
articles?
yeah. I mean, one of the things that, I mean, I, I was raised in a very conventional Catholic family and went to, a lot of parochial schools, although my first 3 years were in public school in the Bronx. But, one of the things that you know, changed is when I started working with John, and I started meeting like, well, how can I phrase this? So, one of the things that Growing Without Schooling did was it created, because it started in 1977. So it's definitely the first publication about, probably in the world, about learning outside of school. But by 1981, when I got there, and that was the year he did the Donahue show, there were religious families who were questioning, and certainly that you could see it in the issues at GWS. They were writing in, but then some of their leaders questioned John's, because he wasn't religious. He was definitely secular. And I've kept the company secular, and I'm not a joiner anymore. I've kind of, my personal experience with religion with me and my family has led me, I believe that there's things we don't understand in life, and that there's possibilities out there. But to me, it's all become political. And I saw that happening in the homeschooling movement, even in the 80s. I mean, there'd be articles like when John was on the Donahue show. There's a family there from Utah, the Kinmonts, and they were skeptical. I remember they were very influential, and they had written this. I mean, is John Holt good or bad? Some article like that before, and I think this was before they even went on the Donahue show. But after they met John and heard him, they came around and said, he's okay. He's okay. But there was always that tension, and that got really strong as like curriculum manufacturers moved into homeschooling. And then it became like, almost just like here, like, you drop the name of the school your kid's in, well, drop in the name of the curriculum you were using. It was like the code that, oh yeah, I'm a good Christian because I'm doing such and such, but there's a truth to what John said, and people who are around their kids, and that's what he always said. I don't care if people use curriculum, was the kids will eventually show them, it's not working. And if they're sensitive, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, if you're sensitive to what's going on with your kids, then you would adjust. I forget how the quote goes, but one of his books, John said, if your child doesn't learn the way you're teaching, you need to adjust your teaching to the child. It's putting it back on us instead of always blaming the student, which is the way most school works. And in fact, most curriculum design programs work. Oh, if you didn't explain it properly to the child, or the child didn't understand it, it's never a valid reason that, no, this really just had no bearing on the child, on anybody's thing. It was just busy work to check it off. In fact, in the early days, I'm sure you could probably still do this even with computers, but in the early days, there were a lot of correspondence programs, for homeschooling, and one of the most popular was Calvert. It still is. But back then, they were selling their curriculum to military people, ambassadors' children, Americans who were like, so it wasn't homeschooling per se. But once, you know, we found out about it and started publicizing it in GWS and other organizations, you know, did, Calvert, like, you know, really became popular, but it was a standard curriculum, you know, and so that became, you know, sort of another, what can I say, marker, you know. And then of course, if you said you're unschooling, you know, in fact, I heard for a while there were some Christians, because I've heard this, because I would speak at Christian conferences, and I hope to again sometime, but it was very common, you know, there wasn't like this horrible split that we have now, or like, you know, and again, it's all politics. It was, I remember back in the 80s, they were talking about like Homeschool Legal Defense Association. They wanted to get Mike Farris on the Supreme Court. They were talking about that even back then, you know? So it's like, wait, I just want to help everybody get their children, who wants to get their children out of school, to do it so that we could show that there are other ways. You know, John wasn't talking about taking money from schools. He wasn't talking, you know, in fact, he was encouraging people like, see if you could work with your school. I was able to get my daughter to take a Spanish class in our local elementary school, you know. We just made a deal with the principal, and it worked, you know. She came in, signed in, took the class, signed out, came back home. You know, we can make these things work. And so John wasn't trying to rip public education down. You know, my taxes, they still go to, you know, I'm unfortunately, they don't go to the public school. If you don't send a kid to it, it goes to this thing called the general fund, you know. So, you know, God knows where the general fund goes in Massachusetts, but there it is. I would much prefer that my money go to the school. You know, I'm not, you know, I mean, I would like that they become more open and let us take classes or participate in the sports and drama offerings, stuff like that. But, you know, they've created this wall over the years, and a lot of private people have moved in, and thank God they did, you know, because, you know, they provided more options for families. But, you know, I really do feel that one thing that we're losing sight of in all this, and I think COVID really brought this out, is that it's socialization is really the most important thing. You know, people always get this backwards with unschooling in particular, you know, because I mean, John, the best reason for teaching your child at home is so that they become better socialized. You know, it's not the peer group socializing them. It's adults. It's a mixed society. Children of different ages, children from different backgrounds. You know, and this is the thing that I think upsets, you know, the more, you know, libertarian or conservative critics of unschooling, because John does feel that, you know, I mean, he considered himself a citizen, as do I, and you know, and there should be public spaces, there should be commons. You know, we've had them throughout every society. You know, there's been these public spaces, and what some people refer to as third places. You know, we have home and we have work, and, you know, people, I forget, Roy Oldham, I think that's an Oldham sociologist or anthropologist, noted that, you know, we've lost these third places in our rush to modernity. You know, the pub, you know, that's a classic example. But, you know, just places where people could socialize without like an agenda, you know. And then if they wanted to create, you know, like, you know, put on a play or something, they had an opportunity, and they had a location that they could do that. You know, instead now everything is become so privatized and so particular about who can use what and so on, that, you know, we're kind of losing this idea of the citizen, you know, and you know, and ironically, you know, John's, you know, Horace Mann, who was one of the founders of the American school system, said that, you know, we need schools so children are socialized. And John was not the first. As I said, people like Bronson Alcott and other people said, no, so this isn't how we socialize. We socialize by doing things together, by, you know, participating in activities, not by constantly being instructed.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
And we socialize
so,
with collaboration, right, rather than competition.
yeah,
Whereas in school,
yeah,
it's just,
exactly.
you know, you're pitted against your peers and your classmates in competition all of the time. Like, sit down, shut up, do your own work, no copying. Like,
Yeah.
What? Okay. In what workplace would that make sense? In what workplace would you not collaborate with each other to solve a problem? Whereas in
Right.
school, you're all given the same problem and only you're allowed to solve it. But you've got to follow the formula I told you to solve it. You can't find a different formula to solve it because you've all got to do the same thing. It's nonsense. And so
It is.
how can one socialize if you're told to sit down and shut up for 7.5 hours of an 8 hour day?
Exactly, exactly. And this really, COVID really brought this home to me, and because as soon as it hit, and there was all this debate about closing schools or not and what to do, you know, I remember, talking about this with a couple of friends of mine at the time. It's like, I hope that they let the kids out, because we already knew that, Scandinavia, a lot of other countries discovered early on that being outdoors, you didn't spread the illness as much, and that children needed to socialize, they needed to play, they needed fresh air, and instead it just shows you how we think about education. We force parents to turn their homes into classrooms using the computer, and we all know how, I mean, not everyone can own it, own the computer. It was a complete mess. Instead, like, in the inner city, like, we have playgrounds and we have teachers and phys ed we have facilities. They would all be outdoors. They could wear masks. Things would have been safe, and at least the kids would have gotten out and continued to learn and grow. But that, I don't know why educators can't see that. That is how you learn and grow. It's not just passing tests, or following instructions. Yeah, those are important at certain times of your life, right? But not a steady diet, and especially for children. So to me, like, when schools are saying, because we've been hearing it ever since I've been in homeschooling, oh, you're going to raise unsocialized monsters, which of course now 40 years, 50 years later, there's so much evidence that, that's not the case, in fact, there's a case to be made that perhaps school creates unsocialized monsters,
Well, yeah,
So,
for
you know,
sure.
yeah, but it really showed me that we have so long to go before schools will appreciate that, giving children, treating them like people, that they should have, some autonomy in their lives. We don't want them to be in unsafe situations,
Mhm.
but yeah, that doesn't mean you control everything. Control is not caring. And I think that schools have completely, lost sight of that. In fact, another piece of evidence comes from Ivan Illich, in Deschooling Society. And I remember talking to him about this, in person. He says that everyone gets the word education wrong, because if you talk to any teacher, they'll say, oh, it comes from the Latin word educere, which means to pull forth, to lead, and so therefore I'm the teacher, I'm leading them, I'm pulling that information out. And then Illich says, first, and you can look this up in the Oxford English Dictionary, that's how I verified it. He says it's not educere, it's educare. That is the actual Latin root of the word educate, and it means to not ingest. What's the word? To nourish. It means to nourish, and that if you look at early statues and paintings of the early monasteries, because Illich was a priest and he studied the origins of the church. He says sometimes, and you probably see some of this in the older places in France, religious sites, where the head of the monastery, a monk, is portrayed as having breasts, and that's the milk of human knowledge. It's, and educare refers to breastfeeding. Yes, it means to draw forth, but it means the child is drawing forth from the parent, not the parent pulling the stuff out of the kid. And so that was eye-opening to me, because really, I mean, one of the things that we know is that our things go better when everyone's happy in the family, feels
Mhm.
cared for and nourished, right? And so yeah, when people say, yeah, let's double the standard so that those fifth graders really learn their algebra, or whatever the topic is that they feel they need to learn. It's like, yeah, but how do you know that they even have enough food on the table? In America, we don't even know they have health care. It's so dicey for so many people, and their parents may be worried about their student debt coming due now, and it's gonna. So there's all these stresses and all this stuff, but none of that counts because, well, that's the parents' thing. They're the ones that take care of the care and feeding. Even though they say we're here to care, and it's control, and control is not care. And so I think that, again, schools opening up to this idea is how they're going to change. But no, it's like the artificial intelligence, whatever the next great product is that'll teach kid the math, how to do mathematics quicker. It's like, they don't. It's like they're denying our humanity.
Yeah. Yeah, true. Like you said at the beginning, you can't force a flower to grow faster, right? It's
Right.
you have to nurture it. And so Deschooling Society, great book, Ivan Illich. I didn't know you'd met him.
Oh yeah.
That's very interesting.
We interviewed him a couple of times in Growing Without Schooling.
How do we? Because this is what I tell parents who come to me or ask questions. Right? Yeah, we've looked into it. We've read a few books. We're really thinking about going for it. We're going to pull the kids out of school, but what curriculums do you recommend? As to your point earlier, it's like, oh, right, no, you're not ready. Well, what do you mean we're not ready? We've done no, you've got like that. You're not ready. If you go straight to a curriculum like you're doing school at home, you've got to deschool yourself. What does that mean? Well, you've got to unprogram everything you hold to be believed, your beliefs that you hold to be true, that were drummed into you over your own 15 to 20 years exposure to this system. And this is what Illich is talking about. In how do we deschool a whole society? How do we undo this 150-year inhumane experiment of locking people up and force feeding them knowledge against their will in a compulsory manner? This is like crazy. And I honestly think hundreds of years from now, people will look back over this period of history and like, what were they doing? What? Wait, so they would take kids from like the age of 3, 4, or 5, depending which place you lived in the world, and then force them into classrooms with random strangers for 8 hours a day, give them minimum sunlight, bad nutritional diets, and then force them to work again when they got home under the guise of homework for 47 out of the 52 weeks a year.
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah.
This.
Yeah. You just reminded me of a great line from I'm paraphrasing from Deschooling Society, but Illich, to that point, especially like with the homework and all that stuff, he said, it seems that the point of the classroom is to pre-alienate children so they'll be used to office work.
Right. Absolutely.
But the sad thing is we don't need, do we really need decades of schooling to prepare us to work in an office?
No. And Sir Ken Robinson, one of my favorite quotes of his is, you can't sit an 8-year-old in a classroom and ask him to do low grade clerical work for hours on end and not expect him to not sit still.
Ken Robinson was brilliant. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
Another great. So let's talk about the sad moment. John passed in, I think, the mid 80s, as we've
85.
spoken to before. What had he seen change? Had there been a shift in the planet of what you guys were trying to achieve? Had he had the opportunity to see some of his work come to fruition? Because I would love for him to be brought back now and see what's happened, like on the back of his work. But what was tangible at that time?
Well, I'm so happy you're asking this, because as I said, I've been collecting all the back issues of Growing Without Schooling into, I mean, they're all online. You can look at them on my website, but the type is super teeny, and so I'm doing it. But in this, the 10th anniversary issue, it goes right there. My colleague Susanna Sheffer opens with this. In 1976, John Holt wrote in his book Instead of Education, where he called for an underground railroad to get children out of the destructive effects of compulsory schooling. He wrote, "There may be no one else who feels this way except me." A year later, John started publishing Growing Without Schooling to prove himself wrong. And he found, to what must have been his great relief and happiness, that many, many people, more with each year of publication, already felt as he did, or were eager to hear what they ought to. And GWS grew from a 4-page newsletter to a 32 or more page magazine, and its scope and implication far exceeded John's expectations. And I think that's absolutely true. I mean, right now, I'm still amazed. It's not a firm number, but they're saying now that homeschooling is about 4%. Some people go as high as 11%, but again, because of COVID, parents saw what was going on and said, well, I could do this. I could get my kids a couple of computer classes, and then they could do more interesting things. People figure out these different ways. So I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. So John's, I think John was, that was it. So John, and he wrote this in Teach Your Own, he didn't think more than 2 to 3% of the adult population would ever homeschool, because of the things that we've talked about. Most people are very status conscious. They want to make sure their kids go get a good education, which often means just going to an expensive college, so he, I think he took a lot of heart, that the small percentage of people, like the people on the Donahue show, small, incremental. And he always saw that change would be incremental. Because he just realized that the power that industry and how school and industry are so locked in. Curriculum manufacturers aren't going to let schools go under, but I think he would be amazed to know that homeschooling is now at the 4% level in the United States, and that many countries allow it, and it's growing there. So yeah, I think he'd be very, very pleased. I know I am, because I've always thought we're going to be stuck in this little niche, but it just keeps growing, and we don't have big funding. There's no foundation promoting unschooling. It literally is a grassroots movement. And some people get upset because there's radical unschoolers and all the. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. I'm not here to control it. If you want to use religion as the source of your inspiration on school, great. That's great. You want to use economic, great. Whatever floats your boat. The important thing is, are you and your children learning together? Are you happy? Do you have a good life together? I think that people forget that living a good life is educational. It doesn't have to be all misery. Because again, school we're always dangling the carrot in front of a mule, so to speak.
Mhm.
And then we all get disillusioned when you realize, oh yeah, like I got my master's degree in English. There's no more English majors in America. They've done away with that whole discipline. I remember in my Catholic school, the nuns would be upset if you weren't writing cursive, right? And so everyone had to learn cursive. Now they stopped teaching cursive in the 1990s. All these things that were absolute musts, they just changed because they had to make way for more things that needed to be taught. Advanced algebra, AP this, AP that. But it's so arbitrary. It's just like, what about, what does a child want to learn? Yeah, and we've seen so many examples with the computers. So many self-taught computer people, Yeah, people always cite Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Wozniak and stuff, but no, there's a lot more. There's folks out there who make a living doing this, and a lot of them were self-taught.
Mhm.
They may have then taken additional classes to move up, but they started from their own interest and from their own ability.
And you still write the blog on the website there, and I've just
Yes.
looked up, and interestingly, this is something that comes up a lot as an accusation rather than any kind of critical feedback, which is something that homeschoolers face a lot, right? That there's a lot of flack that comes your way when you step outside of the masses, right? The masses are generally happy, but the kids on the big yellow bus, I've done everything I can. I've moved into the right sphere of influence, got to the best school I can. I'm working
Mhm.
all the hours of the day that I can. You feel as though you're doing the right thing. So when you come across the weird homeschool family that are doing something else, the one pushback or accusation is that, oh, well, it's all fine for you to, experiment with your children and, but you have no idea that the damage that you're going to do with them, they'll never be able to socialize that again. They'll never be able to
Yeah,
get a job. What if they want to be a doctor? All of this kind of stuff, right? So what do you say? What would you say to people that are experiencing, that kind of pushback? Because
yeah.
I've seen it cripple people to the point where they're like, you know what, I can't handle this. I don't want to be the odd one out. And
Right. It's hard to be different. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, I'm going back to these issues, and I saw this interview that was published in 1983, uh, 2 years before Holt passed away. He was interviewed on this radio station about this report. And in fact, several, because he was such a famous critic, he wound up, speaking about this a lot at the time. And the report was called "A Nation at Risk," and that was 1983. And this very question was asked to him. Aren't you guys experimenting with your children? When school has the tried and true way. And then, short answer, and you can read it on. That was my most recent blog post from a week ago. But and I reprinted the whole reply that John and the interviewer exchanged. But in short, John pointed out that, first of all, schools are always experimenting on our kids, as this report shows. The Nation at Risk report actually said if a foreign nation were trying to undermine America, the way they would do it would be to make our schools so bad they would resemble this. And this was both parties. Oh my gosh, it was a real damning study, and there've been many since then. Schools, and just like we said, like penmanship's important. No, it's not. Oh, being in English, understanding literature. Oh, no, it's not. And when I think about what's going on, and people saying parental rights, it seems like if there's the parental right to keep your children from learning about history, or the parental right to keep your children from knowing anything that contradicts the conventional wisdom that everything is fine. Everything is fine if you'll just obey. And that's it. And a lot of people have been buying into that, but I think that now we're starting to see, that unfortunately, a lot of the computer stuff has just, because that's where the money is, just ported school into the computer. And instead of figuring out, there can be ways, and I hope that there will be more, that Pokemon Go was a great hit when it came out, and it got people walking and doing stuff outdoors. It's like, well, why can't we figure that out with other things, for our kids? But no, it's very important to keep them locked. It's the whole idea that children only learn by being instructed, and whether that's a live person or the computer program, everyone's comfortable with that. But my oldest daughter, Lauren, back in the 90s, when she was homeschooled right through high school, And she was during her high school years, she took she hated math, and she knew that she needed work, and so we hooked her up with a program from, it was called the Princeton Review at the time, and she hated the online math program. She said it was just a textbook on steroids, and she was right. When I sat down with her and worked with her. And so, that was a waste of money. $600 down the drain. But we try, but that's what you do. You try these things, But the thing is, we accept the feedback and say, this doesn't work, we're not going to continue. Most parents, most schools would say, you got to finish it. We spent the money. The program lasts 12 weeks. We're only in week 2. Sorry you don't like it. It's like, well, teach the way the child needs to be taught, not the way the only way that and that's the thing that I loved about Growing Without Schooling, and when we have conversations like this online, it's many people saying, well, we use such and such, we found this book helpful, we actually went to the museum and saw this exhibit, and that sparked an interest in such and such. So the more input you get about what's possible, but and that happens very organically, like at homeschooling meetings, park days were thank God, are still popular. People still like to get out, But again, John Holt always said that teachers should have their own version of Growing Without Schooling, where they talk about what's working and what's not working in their classroom, and they try different ideas. But that's still dangerous, still dangerous, And like I said, John got fired for doing that, and
and now the amount of regulation that's crept in over the last couple of decades, across the globe, you'd be strung up for having those kind of discussions in the staff room. At what point did you realize that you were going to carry on John's work? Is this something you both discussed before he passed, or?
Well, yes, because John struggled with cancer for about 3 or 4 years, before he passed, and I was his business manager and personal manager. So, we had a lot of discussions, and he was, and again, he was skeptical of authority because of his experience, from that, not just with the World Federalists, as I described earlier, but he had a tumor on his right leg. And doctor said, we should biopsy this and, and remove it and biopsy it and see what's going on. So I went to the hospital, and the day of the procedure, they marked the wrong leg, for the procedure. And when John told the person who was marking, he said, that's not the right leg. No, this is it. And he left. And so John got up and left the hospital. He never went back. He's like, I'm not having this procedure. They're not going to listen to me, Excuse me. And so, hang on. So John's journey into alternative medicine began in earnest. He was always, promoting natural childbirth, breastfeeding, anything that makes you self-sufficient, because as Illich pointed out, and John fully agreed, school is where we learn to be consumers, where we get rewarded for giving, for achieving these little things. We get these little bits of food that keep us coming back for more. And so we developed that behavior. So John listened to his own advice. So he looked into, he went to Mexico for the Hoxsey treatment, which didn't work. Then there was another one, Ann Wigmore, I think was her name, and she had chlorophyll treatment. And so we were getting like all this wheatgrass sent in, and we have to juice it up for him. And he tried that, and that didn't work. Then he flew to Illinois. There was a laser treatment that he had read about, and the laser treatment, he didn't feel comfortable doing it once they explained all the dangers for everything. And so it was his editor, Lloyd Lawrence, who also edited books by this doctor named Dr. Bernie Siegel. He was down in New Haven. And because Merloyd knew him, and John read his book and said, okay, I would be comfortable having Bernie operate on me. And so, and by then, the tumor had gotten so big that you couldn't put pants on. And we didn't have the internet in those days. He kept wanting me to find a kilt for him. He's Scottish. And I couldn't find kilts anywhere, in the yellow pages in those days. So he wound up, just taking a gigantic bath towel and wrapping it around him and, tying it up with a belt and walk down the street and come to work that way, And then he went and had the surgery, but it was too late. They were able to remove the tumor, but the cancer had already spread. And then he lived maybe about a year after that. So during that whole time, we talked about it. And one of the things that I'll never forget, and was that he said he didn't want to be the dead hand on the grave, from the grave, controlling stuff. Because I have no idea what's going to happen after I go. You and whoever you work with, want you to have the control. So I was only 26. So I was, a little uncomfortable taking full reign. So so we came up with the idea of having a board of directors, which was several people who worked in the office, and that we knew, and that I knew. So I was comfortable working with them. And then I became president and publisher, and after John died, and hired Susanna Sheffer, who became the next editor of GWS and edited for 16 years. I mean, John only edited the magazine for 8 years before he died, and I kept it going for 16 years after his death, So yeah, I mean, John, we had very serious conversations, but the main thing was, here's the only thing he asked me to do: keep his books in print as best I could, because he understood how the industry worked. Keep my books in print, but that's it. You can do whatever else you want, And and I've always appreciated that, especially now that I look at the gerontocracy that's running America and most of the world these days. Like, these guys, they are the dead hand from the grave. And here in the States, they've been writing laws so that we can't change laws going into the future. It's like, this is pretty crazy, But I'm very grateful that I worked with a man who had a vision that wasn't to constrain the future or control it, but just to help us face it with an open mind.
Yeah, and you've done a great job, mate.
Thank you.
The book here, I've got the 50th anniversary edition here in front
Oh
of me.
yeah.
So you did keep it in print, and you've updated them as well, as far as I'm aware, and you
Yes.
try and keep them as relevant as possible. And it's is this how like the organization makes money? Is that primarily the only thing that you sell, or how
Yeah.
does that run?
Well, right now, that is how, that's it. It's just the sales of the books, and the self-published books that I have up there, the Holt Associates books, and I think there's 5 books that other publishers have licensed, so I get some royalties from those. But they're not bestsellers. I mean, this is not. Those days are gone. And unless you've got some sort of PhD and did 5 TED Talks, no one's gonna pay attention to you in the world of academia these days. It's and that was, I mean, that had been true, but but I always was able to find people, or they found me, who were in like these institutions that said, well, we'd like to invite you. Like at least once a year, I get invited to talk to Alternative School Day or something like that. That hasn't happened since the late 90s. I don't think they even, schools of education even discuss alternative education anymore. It's yeah, it's pretty interesting how things have gotten worse instead of better in some ways, but homeschooling has grown, I think, as a result of things getting worse. So
do you still go to do you go to conferences? Do you get invited to go and speak at the like homeschool events and things like that?
Not nearly as much as I used to. I mean, like I said, I would go to Christian conferences, secular conferences. We even put on our own conferences, and they were very successful. but it got very expensive, and then and fractured. It's funny, but I know that some unschoolers consider me like this middle of the road sort of conservative sort of person, and that I don't believe in true freedom for children and families, and yeah, I mean everyone has their stick, and then of course the religious. If I'm not this type of religion or that type of religion, I can't address that one. No one cared back in the 80s and 90s. We were all in this together. They were coming and you could read in the issue. They were taking taking us to court for teaching our children at home, regardless of whether you were religious or you were doing it because you were environmentalist or communitarian, and so there was that sense of unity, but it splintered over the years as it became more and more politically oriented, and by the late 90s, it become, I mean, a lot of the Christian conferences would have military people coming in and give keynote addresses. Oh yeah, they still do, and politicians, would come, and so it changed. It wasn't like let's share our information and here's a friendly teacher or a friendly professor to help us. Instead, it's now no. Listen to this, and they're almost always men, white men. It's just saying do this and everything will be fine. So yeah, things have splintered over time as society. So yeah, I interestingly enough, my last paid speaking engagement was to a group of charter schools. And how they can help homeschoolers and unschoolers in particular, because they want to set up their charter to be more experiential and working with families instead of trying to make the family fit into the mold of the school. And so every now and then I get that, but even that happened a year ago. There hasn't been another one since. I mean, I think that schools have gotten very locked down. And COVID proved it, right? I mean, they just couldn't think outside the box. Let's at least let the kids play, let them have recess. Well, one of the first things they did was cut recess in schools in the 90s here in the States. I can't speak for elsewhere, but it was because they needed more learning time. In fact, it got so bad they even cut lunch. There were, in our local public schools, one group of students had to eat their lunch at 10 in the morning. Which is ridiculous, and your parents protested. But I mean, these ideas, they happened. They eventually got changed, but that's the thinking. Oh yeah, they need learning time, so we got to cut back on recess and make that learning time. Oh, they need lunchtime. Oh, cut back on lunchtime. It's like, they're children. It's like they're on, as John said, they're like empty bottles on an assembly line in school instead of individuals.
Where do you see the next 5 to 10 years heading with your work and with the website and with unschooling, homeschooling, alternative education in general?
Well, I mean, go from the specific to the general. With the website, my goal is to, I mean, one thing I've experimented with is doing consultations, and I decided that that's not something that, I mean, if someone wants to pay me for a business consultation or something like that, like the charter schools to do stuff, I'm comfortable doing that. But in my experience, I get too close to the families. I can't get that professional distance to to really do it, and so I found that so that was a drain. But what I do want to do is promote more of the ideas about what homeschooling and unschooling can be based on what it has been. So I really want to get. I mean, we've got 141 issues, of growing without schooling. I'm only on issue 58. Laying it out. There's a lot of really good information. So I'm trying to figure out new ways to package that and get it out there. And again, speaking and book sales come from it, great, but a lot of that I'm just putting out there, and hopefully I'll see what gets traction. Because there really it is a shame that I know that there are unschooling I was interviewed by a reporter a couple of weeks ago, and she said she went to an unschooling conference. I went, "Oh yeah, where?" And it was up in Keene, New Hampshire. She said, "It's like, oh yeah, I do recall hearing something about that." She said, "Yeah, I went there and it was organized by a group of college students, homeschooled college students." She said, or college age students. I don't think they were in college, but she asked them, what do you think of the work of John Holt? And none of them, they said, we'll have to read about it. They didn't know, but they're calling themselves unschoolers, and I get it, because, it's like when Illich came up with deschooling, people all said, oh, we're going to blow it up. They just want to blow everything up. It's like, no, that's not what I mean. And the same thing with unschooling. Everyone says, oh, so you don't want people to learn, it's like, no, and then you get into, trying to explain. I mean, that's why John reluctantly but willingly went to the word homeschooling. It does have the wrong connotation of putting school in your home, but at least parents could grasp that as a way to start to pull themselves towards something freer, like unschooling, because the language gets in the way so many times. Deschooling, unschooling, so trying to make those words less scary and more palatable too, so people realize it's not like we're isolating ourselves from society. In fact, it's the opposite. We're trying to bring children into society more, trying to find out ways that parents and children can participate in society without always, having to pay for childcare in public school or private school. It's like, let's figure out like this balance, between individuality, being us, and being me. We've done a really good job of the me, to the point that now everyone gets their scores in school and stuff, but the us thing is really important, very important, and the more we help children socialize in their own ways, I think the more we'll learn about how children actually learn and how we as adults can help them. We're just stuck in this 19th century idea that children learn like we create products, in a factory setting, on an assembly line, on a schedule, timed. I was just reading this thing about how unfair time tests are. So now the big innovation for the Scholastic Achievement Test is they're not going to time it anymore. So you can take as much time as you want to do it. It's like, thank you, whoopee. It's like, but it's like it took them 50 years. Like, people have been protesting the SAT. We've been selling books by well-known authors, arguing that standardized tests, put people in unfair boxes and force schools to teach to the test. And now we're seeing standard, the tests are being dropped by colleges. Not all of them, but it's finally being questioned. But it's like, there are so many other ways of evaluating. Same thing in business. Like, to go back to the beginning of the conversation, where the employers are bringing, the employees together, not trying to pit them against one another, and, I mean, this kind of bothers me because it's so trendy, but I read in a business magazine, now HR people don't give feedback, they give feed forward.
Oh my God.
So they're trying, but they still can't lose the control aspect. It's like, no, I know you're the boss and I want to make the product the way you want, but I think if we move this here, this will go better. Or if we work, but it's like, you got to go through all these layers, so yeah, as a real roundabout way of saying, I hope that, through my work, that people will see that there are other ways of doing things that are just as productive, but less stressful and less endangering to a child's curiosity and to your own spirits. I mean, as a parent, I mean, it is quite a joy when your child does something that they're proud of, and and that you actually have minimal influence on. It's like, where did they get that? When one of my daughters started playing a song on the piano, and I hadn't shown her anything, I was thrilled. I was like, yeah, they can figure this stuff out. And then when she asked for lessons, I was there. And then when she quit, that was hard for me, but I had to learn, right? Because that was hard for me because I love the piano. But then, she went on to play the drums and then the bass, and then she became a singer, so I was like, but if I had done the school thing, it was like, well, look, it's piano or bust, I may have turned her off to music for the rest of her life, and I'm glad I didn't.
Well, it's my hope that the conversations like this, that I keep bringing guests like yourself on to address the audience, that they might have been tuning in to learn more about Bitcoin. We haven't talked about that at all. We've talked about something that I believe is intrinsically linked to it. This idea of more control, more self-sovereignty, more
Yes.
freedom, having and bringing the family back to the family unit. Because as soon as you give it up, as soon as that 3, 4, 5-year-old walks out of the door and into that institution and has the gates locked behind them and then the doors locked behind them, there's somebody else's. And somebody else is bringing them up with their curriculums, their agendas. And that's not,
Yeah.
I wouldn't like to hazard a guess as to the psychological damage that, has happened to all of us that have been through that system.
Mhm.
And it has on parents that watch it happen in front of their eyes with their own kids, but
Right.
feel completely powerless. So empowering people with the knowledge that there is a choice, and we're not all these crazy hippie
Right.
cultist, like secular Christian, Catholic, whatever,
Right.
which you get pigeonholed into, because again, if you're weird, you've got to be labeled something, because labeling happens at school. The sorting system that the school is, everybody gets a little label that first week. You're in the cool kid gang, you're in the jock gang, you're in the goth gang, you're in this gang, and you'll never break out of that. Right?
Mhm.
You're done from that first week.
Mhm.
We will never know the damage it has done to us. And this is why I like talking to Naomi and getting inside her head, because she does an incredible work there. I hope that just one more family might free themselves by listening to this conversation. So I really
That's how
appreciate.
it's been. Yeah. Thank you. And that's what it is. It's one family at a time, It's because as we said, it's like you have to reach the decision to be comfortable with it. I can't tell you to do it, because then I'm just being the teacher saying, "Sit down, shut up, and do as I say." You know. Yeah. Well, I
Exactly.
appreciate the time that we've had together, and I really you know two things I'd recommend. The War on Kids is a documentary that came out, I don't know, maybe 5 years, maybe even longer, maybe 10 years now. But that's really good if you want to see, because it's specifically about public schools, and the documentary footage in there, and the critiques from actual school teachers, are pretty strong. And I make a teeny appearance in the movie. I think I got 4 lines, but yeah, it's mainly focused on schools. It doesn't touch on homeschooling much at all. And then the other one is called Class Dismissed. And that's, there's going to be a free showing on September 30th of that. I forget, the Liberated Learners. It's a group of learning centers in the Northeast. They're sponsoring it. So if someone's interested in that, that's going to be a free showing online. If you go to the Holt GWS page on Facebook, I have the link to that.
Excellent. Director is our mutual friend Jeremy Stewart.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right, Jeremy Stewart. I didn't know you knew.
that's how we got connected all those years ago.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah,
Goodness. Wow. Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Again, it's nice working with you, Daniel.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of
It was
connections. I
Jeremy that
forgot
said
that.
you have to chat with Pat Farenga, because he's the closest person that was ever to John, worked directly underneath him and as a partner as well in the end,
Mhm.
and then carried on his work. And Jeremy's other film is
Yes. Self-taught.
Self-Taught. That's it. Self-Taught.
Yes. Yes.
Great, great resources for people to dig
Absolutely.
into.
Yeah.
The books, obviously, go to John Holt, GWS,
Yeah.
grab a
Teach
copy.
your own. I revised it in 2021.
There you go.
So it's all up
That's the one. And then watch these documentaries. And don't go out there looking for curriculum packs, ladies and gentlemen. This
Right.
isn't learning isn't linear. You got to
That's right.
de-school yourselves first. So, Pat, I really appreciate everything you've done, everything you continue to do in this space. You are a legend, very, very well known within this space. If you've been in around it, you know who Pat Farenga is. And yeah, thank you for spreading the message. Appreciate your time.
And thank you for inviting me. Pleasure speaking with you, Daniel. And
Cheers, man.
Lauren.
And Lauren, of course.
Yes.
See you.
All right. Take care.